Okay? 6? Okay, so the one disclaimer I need to put with this talk, they're very addictive. Right? I started with one, I've got 22 as well as about 80, so mine are 1 metre square, right? As well as 80 square metres of in-ground veggie garden. And actually, if I knew about them when I started my veggie garden, probably 2/3 of it would be wicking beds, right? They literally make gardening easier. And when you're busy, to take the stress out of things, that is huge. So you can do them either way. Now really, this is the principle. So we've got soil, down here I've got scoria or gravel. I used to make them using scoria, right? Now that was before these high-tech inserts, right? Because I was making them with whatever I can. So basically all this does is this becomes the reservoir layer. It's where the water goes, okay? So you've got your reservoir layer, you've got your soil. Now the soil can't be cruddy soil, right? It's got to be high quality veggie garden soil with high organic matter. Why? It's because wicking only works with high organic matter content. And then you have to have some sort of barrier between the soil and the reservoir layer. So when I did them in the old days, I did them with scoria or gravel. Why? Because the scoria was free. Someone was trying to get rid of it out of their garden. I'm always on the scrounge for doing things as cheap as you can. Some people said to me, oh, they put shade cloth down in between. Shade cloth lets too many fines of the soil get into the reservoir layer, which is actually going to gunk up your reservoir layer, so you lose capacity in your reservoir layer. And so I use geotech fabric. Geotextile fabric is this sort of synthetic, very tightly woven fabric. It's what they put over agricultural grains, and it means no fines of the soil go down into the reservoir layer. So, and what happened is, so basically what happens, so then you have a way to get water in, an inlet pipe, and you have an overflow pipe. Now this was something taken off the Gardening Australia website when I did a segment on making them years ago, and it's not quite right. The overflow point needs to actually be at the right height. It needs to be at the join of the soil and the reservoir layer. So there are lots of different ways that you can make them, but the principle's the same. This is how I used to make them with scoria. These are wicking beds. These are the water ups. Now, when I was doing the Kangaroo Island community garden, so I came up with this idea that we set up a community garden where we could grow some produce to help support these people that have lost everything. You know, I can't go there and help them pull down fences, but I can help them grow veggies. And to me, to give them a place where they could get their hands in the soil was what I wanted to do. And at the time, I was having to take everything from the mainland to KR. So it's about it's a long half-day trip to get there from my place, and we were having to transport everything to the island. So I had to take the soils over to the island. I had to take the IBCs over to the island. And then I'm looking to have to take scoria over to the island too on the ferry. This is the most expensive ferry in the world per distance, literally, you know, and I was getting no subsidy to get over there. And I came up with this idea that I thought might get us a government grant, which it did, and part of that was to make this community garden portable. So rapid build and portable. The reason why, rapid build, I only had a window of 6 days in my calendar between talks that we could do anything. And portable because if it was deemed in a couple of years that you didn't need the community garden at this site, it could all be forked onto a truck and taken to someone's home. Now, if we're talking about 1 square metre IBC wicking beds and you've got 30 centimetres of soil on its bed, that's 300 kilos, right, of soil. So it's still hard to fork onto a truck. But if I put gravel at the bottom, that's probably another 200 kilos. So suddenly I've got 500 kilos we're trying to move. If I put water ups in there, right, that's almost no weight in the reservoir layer. So I thought, okay, this is going to cost us a lot more to do it with water ups, but it means I can fulfil this portable criteria. I was actually pitching for grants from Minderoo Foundation as well as my government, my state government. So I needed to come up with ideas that they might think that's a great idea. So we ended up going for water ups. And to be honest, I had done one wicking bed with water ups before, but I'd always thought, you know, I do everything, not on the cheap, I do everything that's affordable, right? Because I'm thinking, well, if you haven't got a lot of money, you still want to grow veggies, how can you grow it if it doesn't cost money? So I haven't necessarily really got into these. But for my community garden bill, build, we got into them. And because I was already doing IBCs, now there's no original idea in gardening. I'd seen someone in Melbourne on Instagram doing IBC wicking beds. And I'd already worked out that my wooden ones, while they were cheap, they would fall apart and I'd have to remake them in a couple of years. And so I thought, do you know what? I want to do something that I don't have to remake. And with a plastic IBC container, you're going to have, it'll last you for 20 years. The plumbing fittings are tank fittings. They're not going to ever deteriorate. So this was something that would have longevity. And you can make them in all sorts of, this is pond liner, they do them in all sorts of ways. Now what I found out is, hang on, now the difference is, everyone has their own take on this. Where I live, I garden with highly salty wall water. 1,700 parts per million, if anyone knows things. Around my area, people garden, well, my first water access where we are was 2,400 parts per million. Now I'm down to 1,700 parts per million. So what happens is, if I've got a wicking bed, like a closed loop, and I keep putting salty water in here, eventually the salts are all going to accumulate in there, aren't they? And I'm not going to be able to get them out. So I saw on a Diggers, I will always acknowledge where I pitched ideas from, I saw on Diggers where they put the outlet, the overflow, right at the bottom on an elbow, okay? And what that meant is that you could drain the water out of the reservoir, okay? So in winter, I open mine up so that they drain constantly, because winter is my wet period. So my wet period, I let the rain flush all the salts through the system. Does that make sense? And that's how I get away with it. Now, about the same time, I've had a number of callers on Talkback Radio ring up and say, Sophie, I've got a wicking bed, it's been fantastic. My grandchild was helping me in the garden, and I had a bottle of soluble organic fertiliser sitting on the garden bed, and they thought they would help me, and they emptied the whole bottle into the wicking bed, right? What can I do? Well, if you haven't got a way to drain it, right, you've actually got to dig it out, right? Because they're probably, too much of a good thing is not going to be good in that situation. So I thought, well, with my IBCs, I quite like the opportunity that I can put the tap right at the bottom and drain them should I need to. But one of the things that happened, and this is, so on Kangaroo Island we set up this rapid build community garden. I took, no I can't remember, I took 15 IBCs to KI, backloaded on someone's big quarry truck. And we put 6 into the community garden that was already existing in Kingscote, and we built the other 24 into the community garden over at Pandana. And so these are the workshops. And the great things, you do need, if you go to the Gardening Australia website, you'll see a segment where I make a wicking bed out of these IBCs. And you will see me using an angle grinder, okay? Now, unlike Millie, that is not my natural habitat. Right? My husband gave me a 5-minute lesson on how to use an angle grinder, and the crew kept saying to me, Sophie, stop looking so terrified. I'm going, this is the Widowmaker. So my husband uses these big things, and it was, that's not me. But I have done it. So basically what happens, you cut them in half and you get 2 beds out of one thing, and they last forever. Now, I have had contact with the distributors of these, and these were never set up for IBCs, right? So what happened is I was doing that, and so now we've had to adapt them to fit into the IBCs, and you'll actually see that we've had to cut them because the IBC isn't just a plain square tank, it's got funny little bits out of it, and so we put a raft, we put a raft of these water ups in there, and I make a bridge in the middle with a bit of core flute, every few years there's a lot of core flute looking for a recycling opportunity, right? You can put some of them to good use. So a bit of core flute, you can get joiners. When we were building the community garden, I had all the joiners over there, and we had about 35 people trying to help. It was absolute chaos. It was fantastic, but it was chaos. And the joiners kept flipping off. And in the end, we worked out, do you know what? A cable tie. How simple is that? So we just attach everything with cable ties. So, this is my version, right? And so the idea of that, but I want to tell you why I've become a huge fan of them. So I use them on KI. because they were portable. And then we came back to my place, and I actually made a couple more. And my daughter, who's here with me, she goes to an agricultural high school, and she had to do this project. And Mum may have suggested something out of self-interest, and that was, why don't you check if there's a difference between using a water-up wicking bed and a scoria wicking bed, right? Why don't you check if there's a difference in growth? Now, we did it over winter in my polyhouse. Wasn't any difference in growth at all that I really noticed out of the scoria and this. But I'll tell you what we found. The water holding capacity of a water-up wicking bed in my IBC was 144 litres of water in the reservoir. In the scoria bed, it was 66 litres. Right? So it had double the water, more than double the water holding capacity of my old scoria beds. And when you live somewhere like me, that's the difference between, if it's a 40-degree week, I might have to top up twice a week with scoria, but with this, I only have to top up once a week. So when I saw the difference was the water holding capacity, and it was easier, it was like, this is the way to go. So I'm totally biased and think these are fantastic. So basically, as you can see here, this is the water lab, this is the plastic barrier. Then you have to work out how you can wick water from the reservoir up to the soil, and that's where we use perlite, okay? So perlite, if you're doing a lot of wicking beds, hydroponic straws, do big bags of perlite. So when we went to KI, we went over there with big bags of perlite that were quite cheap. The other thing is that with perlite, if you are touching it a lot, it can sort of buff your hands. So we made sure as a community build, everyone had gloves on. We also put water in the big bags. There's quite a bit of dust which you wouldn't want to be breathing in, so we put water into the bags to try and wet the perlite, and then you put the perlite in these areas like that. Now, and that's what they've done here, and you can buy these kits. Now, I absolutely love these pots. I think they are fantastic. I'm just going to turn it around so we can see this. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is already designed for you. Okay, so you can, this is a specially designed wicking bed pot. You know, self-watering pots are not a new thing. Who remembers them from probably the 80s, right? So they were around big, and, sorry? No, I was in the nursery in the 80s, in the late 80s. But one of the things with self-watering pots back then, because we weren't being water-wise, because we hadn't had issues of water security, people tended to water them daily, okay? And so the challenge with that is that the plants actually got wet feet. And a really important thing in soil is air, right? And so you need to make sure that you're not constantly, people say, oh, I've got wicking beds, but I'm topping them up daily. You actually don't want that, right? You want to make sure that there's a cycle, you know, of the soil drying out before you top it up. And so these wicking containers are great. You know, you can make your own. You can look at Roman's thing on how he made a wicking bed out of the foam boxes. That's on Gardening Australia. You can look at mine, but if you were in a courtyard, or let's say you had a balcony garden, right? You don't want to be fussing around with stuff up there. Anything you can do to minimise work in a garden means that you've got more time. Minimise the boring work, like watering, means you've got more time for the fun stuff. Perlite simply goes in there. In the old days, when I remember when water-ups first came out, they were actually putting soil in there, right? But actually perlite works better to draw up. Now I do something in my big ones that's slightly different. I do use geotextile fabric just to stop, because otherwise you can see that it's not quite a perfect fit. Can you see that? So soil's got to go down in there and gunk it up. So we do use perlite. And then you fill it with good soil. Now can I tell you, you know, never skimp on soil to grow veggies. The quality of your crop is determined by the quality of your soil, right? It's really simple, and spectacular soil will yield you spectacular crops. It does need to be replenished with organic matter if it's in a pot or a wicking bed, like it would do in the garden, right? You don't, soil is like it's like a brew. It's a living organism. Well, it's billions of living organisms actually, but soil is an ongoing. Soil improvement is ongoing. Sometimes I meet people who say, "Look, I've done a wicking bed. I've put the soil in. Tick." Like, you're going to be putting more compost, more organic fertiliser in every time you plant. That's really important. Now, if you're going to do them with your IBCs, which I do, it worries me, if I go back, it worries me, so this lets light through. If you have the reservoir layer, you get light through. So it worries me because I've seen that if you don't cover it with something, the water in there goes green, you get algae growing. And I'm not particularly interested in eating that. I know, algae might be one of our future food crops, but not necessarily in the bottom of your wicking bed. So I clad them with wood. Now, this is the community garden that we were building. This is the first woman I ever saw. She was just using, she's in Melbourne where it's cold, she was just using black weed mat to cover the sides. I like things that look pretty. Anyone else like a pretty veggie patch? A veggie patch to me, just the produce is aesthetically pleasing. I want the whole environment to be aesthetically pleasing. I want it to feel like this is heaven in a veggie patch. And I don't like neat veggie patches necessarily, but I just want a veggie patch that's aesthetically pleasing. So on KI, this is what we did. We made all those panels back in my shed, and we transported all the panels over there and put them on the side. And because the IBCs have these metal things, it's really easy. Well, you can actually drill straight onto them if you put some battens on, or we had them as panels to make it quicker so that we could do it in a hurry. And that does two things. It insulates the side. It does also mean that light's not getting to that reservoir layer, so the water won't go green. So that's really important.